Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Chandler Padgett, and I'm so grateful to be able to have the opportunity to speak with each of you today. So before we get into this amazing topic that we're going to dive deep into and really target, I would love to kind of give you just a little background of myself so you know where I'm coming from and what my background is. So I currently teach full-time at Columbus State University. I've been an assistant professor there for 5 years, which is amazing. I've taught several years in the undergraduate program, and I currently teach in the nurse practitioner program at Columbus State University. I also have nursing experience in the ICU, and then becoming a nurse practitioner, I have nurse practitioner experience as a hospitalist as well as in the hospice settings. And then currently I own Glow Medical Aesthetics, and so I work part-time doing injectables such as fillers and toxins part-time. But my passion is advocacy, and my passion is really helping us to be able to bring our community at the local, state, and national levels up, to raise everyone up, to help educate on what's currently going on in our communities. So I would love to also tell you a little bit about how I'm active within our communities. So I currently serve on the local and regional DFACS boards out of Columbus, Georgia, and for the Columbus, Georgia region. I'm also so grateful to serve as the Executive Vice President for UAPRN of West Georgia, which is the West Georgia chapter of the United Advanced Practice Registered Nurses. And I'm also so thankful to serve currently in my third term as the legislative chair for the Georgia NAPNAP chapter, and that's the National Association of Pediatric Nurse Practitioners. So as you can see, there's a variety of experience clinically, a variety of passions as far as advocacy. And so I would love to now dive into this topic that is such a massive topic that not only we're going to address today, but that we're addressing at the local, state, and national levels. So the topic today is, could human trafficking happen to you? There's a large misconception that human trafficking, it would never happen to me because I don't go to places like XYZ, or I don't hang out with people like XYZ. But I think it's so important to bring awareness to the fact that this can truly happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. So please don't ever feel like you're able to let your guard down because you truly don't know. Sex trafficking is considered to be the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, patronizing, or solicitation of a person for commercial sex or labor. So this doesn't have to be sex trafficking. This can also be labor trafficking and of the sort. So this next slide is really harnessing the three major pillars for this year's 2024 Georgia Commission on Women's Wellness Summit. So these four pillars, as you can see here, are focusing on women and children's health, as well as maternal mortality and human trafficking. So we're really going to dive into human trafficking during today's presentation. So before we get too deep into the statistics currently for Georgia, cities within Georgia, and our nation as a whole, I want to do a little overview with each of you on what human trafficking is, so what it can be considered. Once we're educated to know what it entails, we're able to be better suited to help stop it from happening and mitigate it from happening in the first place. So human trafficking can be considered sex trafficking, which we know and have heard of, I'm sure. Of course, labor trafficking, and this would be as far as working underage and so on and so forth. Domestic servitude, slavery, and sexual exploitation. So this also can be considered pornography and in that industry as well. So it's important to also understand, as we spoke on earlier, this can happen to anyone at any age. However, statistics do show us that some individuals may be a higher likelihood depending on their socioeconomic status, their poverty level, their sex, and their race. Okay, we're going to dive into that a little bit later. So the first question I want to ask you is who is being targeted? And I really want you to take a second and really ponder in your mind when you think of the targets or potential victims, who you are seeing in your mind. Okay, we're going to dive into this. So my first question is, what is the average age of individuals being sold pertaining to sexual purposes? Okay, so this, of course, is the sexual exploitation, the pornography, and sex trafficking. So what do you believe is the average age? I'm gonna give you a second to think about it. So it's 13 to 14 years old. Now, I don't know if you're like me. I personally thought it might have been a little older, but so just know we want to help integrate this information into the school systems, into individuals before they would reach this age, of course, during and after, to really help our school systems be set to mitigate this before it happens. Who or what populations are the most likely to be targeted? So we talked about it doesn't matter what age you are, what race, what gender, that truly anyone can potentially be a target. However, statistics show us that some individuals may have a higher likelihood. So that's what we're about to dive into. So individuals who are experiencing poverty, who may need money or who may be seeking money, may be more likely to be targeted because they can be falsely lured into a sex trafficking scheme if they think they can get a little money and they need money, right? Or anything of the sort. So people who are experiencing poverty can be at a higher risk because of their desires as well, right? So also unsafe living conditions. Again, this goes back to socioeconomic status. If they hear promises of a better living condition or clean water or a safe bed to sleep in, then they also can be lured more easily. It's also important to understand that people who can also be trapped and controlled, again, through different threats, through false promises, and through debt. So an individual, as you could imagine, that may have debt may be more likely to be lured into this scheme if they're promised money. Someone who doesn't have food or water that's clean may be lured into a scheme such as this by these false promises. So again, really educating our school systems, our communities at the local, state, and national level on how to prevent this before it happens. Believe it or not, the International Labor Organization estimates that more than 20.9 million victims of sex trafficking are worldwide. 20.9 million. That is just such an astounding number. And we're so grateful for First Lady Marty Kemp, who has really taken this by storm and harnessed this current issue. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. In June 2010, there was a study that found that sex trafficking victims, the percentages broken down into different races. So buckle your seatbelts because this is really interesting. So out of the races of African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, and Asian, which race do you feel was most likely to be trafficked? And you can say that loud. Okay, so I'm going to break this down. This is really interesting. So African American men and women, so keep in mind this is not just women, this is men and women, were found to be sex trafficked at a 40% rate. Okay, which is really high, right? That's almost 50%. So a 40% rate, while Caucasians were 26%, Asians were 17%. So you guessed it, that leaves our Hispanic population at 63%. Y'all, this is astounding. And the best thing is knowing data like this can really help us educate not only these various populations in the school systems and in our communities, but just to bring awareness to this is so incredible. So now you might be asking yourself, where is sex trafficking taking place? Now we know who can be a victim, but where are these victims potentially being reined in? So I want to first draw attention to the fact that pornography and illicit spas and massage businesses were the #1 most common venue where sex trafficking occurs in the United States. Okay. So, and I know you've probably grown up hearing of, oh, massage parlors and this, but just know that in the United States, so nationwide, illicit spas and massage parlors were number one for these occurrences. Broken down from that, the three most likely places in the United States where sex trafficking occurs are motels and hotels. Now, this also can be motels and hotels where someone goes to stay in that motel and hotel and unknowingly is then trafficked. This also is taken into account people who meet online or on the internet and they meet at a hotel or motel. They're also placed in this category as well. Again, locations arranged on the internet. So this could be Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, places we go all the time where you might be meeting someone for the first time and then you're catfished. Okay. So keep this in mind as well. In addition to commercial brothels, and this entails or is the big overlying umbrella for massage parlors, spas, and etc. In addition to what we've already addressed, other places of note would be places of erotic services, which we've mentioned, massage parlors, the internet, right? So meeting individuals on the internet and speaking back and forth and meeting up, as we've spoken of. Also, pre-existing relationships. This is something that people don't normally think about because when we think about someone being sex trafficked, we don't automatically think that this could be our friends or family or people that we know, but unfortunately it can be. So also understand that pre-existing or prior relationships and also future relationships, this can occur as well. Also, strip clubs and truck stops are other places that also are known for sex trafficking. So just keep this in mind as well, not only when you're educating others in regard to prevention, but as you're out and about, keeping your awareness up and your eyes open in case you were to see anything that's suspicious. So now we're going to talk about who these traffickers can be. So I know we spoke in the last slide. I don't know if you're like me, but my initial reaction is not thinking of friends and family because you feel like that's your safe zone. Your friends are safe, your family are safe. If they're in your circle of trust, then they're safe and you can trust them. I'm not saying not to, but just be aware that, believe it or not, a fair percentage of individuals who are sex trafficked through their friends or their so-called friends who they think are their friends at the time, family members, as well as strangers, which if you're like me, this was the category that I felt was my automatic understanding was strangers. Also acquaintances, maybe people you go to school with or someone that you know lives down the street, your neighbor. So acquaintances that you're familiar with that may or may not be in your close friend circle. Also, those who are seeking to monopolize on a situation and preying on the vulnerable. So we spoke earlier of people who may have debt. So maybe they're looking for a way to make money, and this seems like an easy way to make money, depending on what they're being promised, and then they're pulled in. Okay, so keep in mind, these sex traffickers a lot of times are just looking at how to prey on these victims and how to pull them in. In 2023, 4.5 million people in the world were victims of forced exploitation. Now, this can be pornography, this can be sex trafficking. This is, of course, the umbrella of sexual exploitation. But 4.5 million in the world is a really large number, okay? So we definitely want to help to educate others to tackle this number and decrease it. So you might be asking, this all is very important information, but how does this affect us in Georgia? How does this affect us in our communities? So I'm so glad you asked. So we're going to dive into this as well. So how is this affecting Georgia? So in 2012, helplines received 363 reports. Now keep in mind, this number isn't necessarily individuals who were caught, isn't necessarily individuals who were put behind bars. These are truly just from a hotline, whether it's a text or a phone call or an email. There were 363 reports. So as you know, when you compare 363 compared to the stats we've been seeing, that's amazing to receive that many reports. But in relation to the number where we're actually seeing the presence of this issue, this is a very small percentage of actual reports. In 2013, education, I'm assuming, is a big portion of this that helped really getting out the hotline numbers and emails. So there were 599 reports received in Georgia. which is a great increase from 2012. In 2014, again, you're seeing that increase where you have 626 reports received and 150 were true cases documented. So again, this is amazing and we are making gains. And then as you can see in 2021, I know there's a little jump there. So in 2021, 50,123 tips were received for Georgia Hotline. So I'm so grateful to say that we're bringing awareness to our communities, to the state of Georgia. But again, this is still the tip of the iceberg that we really need to dive deep into our communities to help really understand what's going on, to help individuals who are potentially at risk and prevent any issues in the future. In 2023, there were 129 victims who were rescued, and this is a huge win because, as you know, not only from reports received or actual cases documented, the main thing, if we're unable to prevent it from occurring altogether, would be to rescue these victims. So being able to successfully rescue 129 victims last year was truly, truly amazing. And I also want to make note that 1 week ago in Georgia, it was reported that we have 100% conviction rate in human trafficking cases. So this is so amazing. And again, I'm so grateful for First Lady Marty Kemp, who has really taken this initiative under her belt. And to be able to have 100% conviction rate is truly astounding and a huge step in the right direction. So now we're going to dive into a couple cities in Georgia. So we went from Georgia, the state as a whole. Now we're going to kind of dive into individual cities. But please know that just because a city is not listed in this PowerPoint does not mean it cannot happen in this city, okay? There are a couple cities that are more known for sex trafficking. Atlanta is a very, very massive hub for sex trafficking. Macon, Georgia as well as Columbus, Georgia, because again, these are close, big cities surrounding Atlanta, not too far from Atlanta as well. So first, we're going to dive into Macon, Georgia. So there was such an issue of sex trafficking going on in Macon, and this is like Bibb County as well. So this was such a great initiative. The school system decided to start a health class survey to really reveal in the school systems the percentage of sex trafficking or what's really going on from the student's point of view. So believe it or not, 13% of 350 students who were surveyed reported they knew someone who sold themselves for sex in the past year. Now, this isn't necessarily saying that they sold themselves. This is saying they know of someone who did. But 13% of 350, that is a lot of students when you're thinking of these school-aged really children who are being exposed to this. 9% of them indicated they know of someone who had been forced to sell themselves. So out of that 13%, 9% felt forced. Now, whether that was through violence or through threats or through gunpoint, it doesn't specify in the survey, but just knowing that 9% of those obviously weren't voluntary, were forced. The other percent were not voluntary, I'm sure as well, but just to know that we're having this type of prevalence and incidents within our cities and within our state and within our nation is astounding and something we definitely want to take part in helping to mitigate. In addition to this, 37 youth in Bibb, Colquitt, and Houston counties were referred to the Children's Advocacy Centers of Georgia and suspected of being exploited between 2020 and 2023. Now, this is amazing that we were able to have 37 youth that were referred. However, when you think about the fact that this is over a 3-year time span and the fact that this is covering multiple counties, as much of a win as it is to be able to locate these 37 youth, think of the people that we weren't able to hit. Okay, so I think this is what's so important in educating and in really wanting to dive into our communities and help mitigate this issue is understanding that there's so many individuals that we haven't touched to really shed light on this subject. And Bibb County of the 3 encompassed 70% of the referrals. So you can see the issue really being prominent in Bibb County, but of course, primarily any county in any city, okay? Next, we're going to discuss Atlanta, Georgia. Now, as you know, this is a major hub in Georgia, in the state of Georgia. 500 youth were referred for being suspected of exploitation from 2020 to 2023. So this is the same 3-year time span, the same study as you saw in Macon in the previous slide, but rather than 37, it was 500. And again, when you're seeing these statistics, 500 sounds like a great number that we're really helping to hopefully save. But think about the youth and the individuals that we're not accounting for. And that's what I want you to really harness into. A recent study also revealed that sex trafficking in Atlanta is bigger than Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Denver, Colorado combined. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time because it is so hard to even wrap your mind around. But that sex trafficking in Atlanta is such a hub that it is bigger than Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Denver, Colorado combined. So we have a lot of work to do. Now that we've looked at Georgia as a whole and a couple cities in Georgia, we're going to kind of take an outward perspective and look at our nation as a whole. So in 2014, National Human Trafficking Resource Center received more than 24,000 reports regarding trafficking, and this was a 26% increase. So as you can tell, this is 2014. There's a little jump to 2020, but in 2020, over 1,000 defendants were charged in the court systems for human trafficking. This is a huge win for getting these individuals off the street and hopefully saving countless other individuals' lives. But again, I challenge you to reflect, to celebrate in individuals that were charged and obtained. And in that celebration, also reflect on the individuals who are still ever present out there that we really need to make sure we're educating people to stay safe from. So I want to ask you a couple questions. Y'all know I love questions. So I want to ask you a couple questions. One question is, what percent of the defendants do you believe were male? You can say it out loud. So believe it or not, 92% were male. But obviously that leaves room. There are females. So it doesn't mean you can let your guard down if it's a male or a female who may be approaching you or trying to speak with you online or in person, or as you're educating others, letting them know it can affect any sex, any gender. It can, the person who is potentially going to try and traffic you can be of any sex or any gender. My next question is, what percent do you think had no prior convictions? So these are defendants who were charged for human trafficking, that this was their first offense. What percent do you think this was? Y'all, this took me aback. 66% of individuals who were detained had no prior convictions. So this means that we really have to be aware and vigilant and have discernment, because 66% of people who were sex trafficking others, this was their first conviction. It's truly astounding. This was also a study, this image you're seeing on the right, showing that 50% of sex trafficking victims are less than 16. And we saw the statistics several slides ago saying that primarily the most likely age is 13 to 14 years old. So keep this in mind as well. Of the same study in 2020, 63% of individuals were Caucasian. In addition to that, 18% were African American, 17% were Hispanic, and 95% were U.S. citizens, meaning that only 5% of those who were charged for human trafficking were not citizens. So 95% of that greater than 1,000 number were citizens, 63% were Caucasian, and 66% had no prior convictions. Do y'all see what an issue this is? We really have to hone in and educate our communities. The next slide is showing a 2019 state map of human trafficking cases. So this is really interesting. You can see us in Georgia, all right, and Florida. So you see these major hubs here, Texas as well, and California. Okay, so just being aware of this map, being aware as a nation where we're falling. on the front lines, I think it's really important while we're educating others on, and ourselves and others on the current incidence and prevalence of sex trafficking. It's also equally as important to celebrate the wins. And so we're so grateful in 2023 to have been allowed the opportunity, right, and for the work and hard work of Attorney General Chris Carr. He worked so hard, and in 2023, he received the Wellspring Living Courage Award, and this is presented on behalf of Delta Airlines and UPS. So he was overseeing in charge of the Human Trafficking Persecution Unit. And in 2023, they rescued over 116 victims, located countless missing children, and were on the front lines identifying and prosecuting felons who sold others and individuals for sex. So he is such an amazing trailblazer for this, along with First Lady Marty Kemp, and they have really taken this under their wing and really tried to harness this from the inside out to really mitigate any potential future issues with sex trafficking and really educate the public. So we're so grateful for Attorney General Chris Carr and the hard work that he has done. This unit was created in 2019 in support of Governor Brian Kemp and First Lady Marty Kemp. First Lady Marty Kemp also is the co-chair of the Grace Commission. So we'll talk about that in a couple different slides, but this also helps to address human trafficking. But this unit, which again, Attorney General Chris Carr was in charge of, formed to combat human trafficking. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, if someone was to be obtained or detained, is rescuing possible? Does rescuing occur? So you've seen in several stats throughout this PowerPoint, many people have been rescued, which is such a blessing, but we have many more to rescue as well as to hopefully mitigate from being detained in the first place. So between 2022 and 2023, there were 245 rescues and 34 convictions, which again, we want to celebrate the wins, but I want to also challenge you to reflect on who we need to rescue and who we need to convict from these numbers. In 2023, there were more than 200 rescues nationwide, which again is such a celebration to be able to save even one life or rescue one life, but to be able to rescue 200 is such a blessing. But when you're looking at 200 nationwide, we talked about the millions and millions of people who have been sex trafficked. So to rescue 200 out of millions, again, is a celebration, but we really have even more work to do. So this is the Grace Commission. We talked a little bit about this in a previous slide, but First Lady Marty Kemp is the co-chair of this Grace Commission, which stands for Georgians for Refuge, Action, Compassion, and Education Commission. Now, this is truly amazing because it's truly spearheading this human trafficking issue that's currently going on, not only statewide, but nationwide and worldwide. So currently estimating that 1.5 million human trafficking victims are in the United States. So again, if you want to be able to really dive into Grace Commission, what their purpose is, what this commission stands for, you're welcome to click on this hyperlink below, or you can look at gracecommission.gov. This is absolutely amazing and you will learn so much. The Grace Commission was formed and created to combat the threat of human trafficking, specifically in the state of Georgia. It's comprised of public officials, law enforcement, for-profit and nonprofit organizations, faith-based institutions, as well as subject matter experts. And they're all working together to be able to tackle human trafficking, seek justice for these victims, and hold people accountable. At this point, hopefully you are charged and you are just feeling this almost burden of what's going on in our communities and in our state and in our nation, and you want to get involved and help. I hope that's where you are because that's where I am. Okay. So I want to tell you about a couple ways you can get involved in the next couple slides. So Traffic Jam is a student-led organization that was actually started in the Bibb County area, so the Macon, Georgia area, to help bring awareness to and decrease the incidence and prevalence of human sex trafficking. So this is such an important issue currently going on. And if you're in this area or familiar with this area, you definitely can join in with this Traffic Jam, which is again the name of it, this amazing organization that's helping to combat and bring awareness to these issues. There's also the organization known as Children's Advocacy Centers of Georgia. You can also take it upon yourself to advocate to your local, state, and or nationally elected officials. Now, this is amazing because, again, with the prevalence being truly worldwide, nationwide, statewide, and community-wide, this is so amazing to be able to really contact your local and state elected officials to be able to advocate for this current issue. In addition, you can encourage local schools and school districts to develop and implement prevention protocols, right? Bringing awareness to the students, educating the students, and developing prevention protocols because, again, that primary window is individuals less than 16, as well as as we saw earlier, the main stat is individuals 13 to 14 years old. Healthcare providers can also become increasingly more educated on the signs and symptoms that can present to be able to, again, bring awareness in their practice. And journalists can also help to educate and bring awareness through their work as well. So if you were to be out in the community, grocery shopping or any kind of shopping, you're in the community, you're at the movie theater, anywhere you are, in your place of work, in your place of worship, if you see something suspicious, say something. So if you see something, say something. So if you're suspecting human trafficking, you can call these various or text these various numbers. So you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline as the number listed here. The Georgia Trafficking Hotline is also listed here. And then you can also text Be Free to 233-733. So these are all great ways to be able to, again, if you see something, say something. Please save these numbers in your phone. That way, if you were to see something, you're not having to try and come back to this PowerPoint presentation to find it. You're able to go right to your contacts and text or call these numbers to be able to hopefully save a life.